The end of the transportation and oil industry, as we know it. We are about to go through one of the deepest, fastest and most consequential disruptions the world has ever seen, in the transportation and energy industries. This is not going to happen because of climate change. This is not going to happen because of government regulations. This is not going to happen because of social movements. This is going to happen purely for economic reasons. And it is a revolution that will actually put money back in the general population's pockets, instead of costing us money. In this video, we are going to lay out the reasons why this is happening and what the future will look like. Before digging into the future of the transportation and energy industry, let's take a ride into the past. This is a picture of Fifth Avenue in New York City, more than 100 years ago, in 1900. As you can see, we still use horses as a means of transportation. Until that point, we had been using horses as our main means of transportation for thousands of years. One interesting fact about this picture is that in this sea of horses we can spot one car. This next picture is in the same street but 13 years later. Do you see anything different? Basically, the means of transportation flipped. There is only one horse in this picture surrounded by a sea of cars. This rapid transformation more than 100 years ago happened in just 13 years. Today, technology is advancing even faster than it was back in these days, so what can we expect from technology disruptions in our modern world? First off, what is a technology disruption? A disruptive technology is an innovation that significantly alters the way that consumers, industries, or businesses operate. A disruptive technology sweeps away the systems or habits it replaces because it has attributes that are recognizably superior. A disruption is essentially when there is a convergence of technologies that make a product or service possible. This new product or service can then help create new markets, new jobs, and new opportunities, as well as destroy or radically transform existing industries. In this case, the car was the disruptor, which radically disrupted the horse as a means of transportation industry. We usually relate disruption with destruction, but that is definitely not the case. In the transportation case of the 1900s, the horse transportation industry was clearly destroyed, but the car transportation industry was created. In the 20th century, the American transportation industry was the economic engine of the country. On December 1, 1913, Henry Ford installed the first moving assembly line for the mass production of an entire automobile. His innovation reduced the time it took to build a car from more than 12 hours to 1 hour and 33 minutes. In 1913 alone, Ford had to hire more than 52,000 workers for a workforce that at any one time numbered 14,000. Another disruptive technology are cell phones. This is a clear example of how difficult it is for us to visualize the rapid pace these technology disruptions have. In 1985, Atant was the largest telecom company on the planet. They hired the consulting company McKinsey to help them figure out how the cell phone market was going to evolve in the next 15 years. Obviously, this was a very important question to answer for Atant. McKinsey started their analysis process and reached the conclusion that by the year 2000, cellular telephony would be a niche market, and would have approximately 900,000 subscribers. They were off by a few zeros. By the year 2000, the actual amount of subscribers was 109 million. McKinsey's estimate was less than 1% of the actual figure. A decade later, this basically cost Atant $12.6 billion in an attempt to recover from their slow start, by acquiring McCaw Cellular. This shows how trying to figure out the size of the market for a disruptor technology based on an incumbent's market is similar to what happened to the car industry in the 1900s, trying to calculate how many cars would be on the roads by 1913 based on the amount of horses riding the streets. It's a difficult task. Why is it so difficult for us to predict technology disruptions? If we look at the past, experts, insiders and mainstream analysts are consistently wrong about these disruptive opportunities. Looking at predictions made in the past is a good reminder that something that seems implausible today might be standard in as few as 5 or 10 years. Just look at what Bill Gates was saying about the Internet in the 1990s. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, was taken unawares by the Internet's grassroots acceptance. He believed the technology for killer applications was inadequate to lure consumers to the Internet. He wasn't sold on the idea that the Internet would be a big deal at the time. Look at us now. So why is it that it's so difficult for smart people to consistently fail or anticipate technology disruptions? Because it is a big deal. A lot of money is constantly being invested in the status quo and how things currently work. So what are the trends going on right now that can give us a sneak preview of the technology disruptions that will occur in the near future? By looking at technology cost curves, we can start looking at what technologies might be disruptive. So what is a technology cost curve? Basically, every technology out there is changing its capability and cost curve every year. This gives us an idea where the technology is going. Probably the most famous cost curve known is Moore's law. Moore's law is the observation that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit, IC, doubles about every 2 years. Moore's prediction has been used in the semiconductor industry to guide long-term planning and to set targets for research and development, thus functioning to some extent as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Advancements in digital electronics, such as the reduction in quality-adjusted microprocessor prices, the increase in memory capacity, RAM and flash, the improvement of sensors, and even the number and size of pixels in digital cameras, are strongly linked to Moore's law. So essentially every 2 years we can buy for the same dollar twice the computing capability data. Storage, digital imaging and other technologies have their own cost curves, but each one of them improves at different rates, which makes it difficult for us to keep up with them. Another element that makes this difficult to track is that we tend to look at the past to make these forecasts, and add a linear projection for the future. We take a baseline and then add a% over the next 10 to 30 years and get a linear projection. We use historical data as inputs to make informed estimates that are predictive in determining the direction of future trends. The problem is that no technology has adopted a linear curve, they either fail or are adopted very quickly. When they are adopted fast they follow an S-curve. What is an S-curve? The diffusion of innovation theory, developed by E.M. Rogers, holds that disruptive technologies, products, and ideas tend to follow an S-shaped adoption curve with 5 stages. First, adoption starts slowly, as only a small group of innovators take a flyer on a new technology before it is proven or widely accepted. Consider this group the buyers of the first Apple Watch, the original Tesla Roadster. The next stage is for the slightly larger group of early adopters to come in, who accelerate the technology's growth and evangelize its value via word of mouth. This is often considered the tipping point in a technology's acceptance, as the early adopters must convince the bulk of the population that a particular technology is worthwhile. Moving to the early majority, we reach the part of the adoption S-curve where the slope is the steepest, and hence the rate of adoption is at its fastest. In this phase, sales growth tends to explode. Adoption continues growing at a solid pace as the late majority are convinced to participate, and the technology appears, seemingly almost everywhere. Finally, the laggards, or the holdouts, begrudgingly acquiesce and accept/adopt a technology. By this point, however, sales growth has cooled off and virtually all of the potential market for a product has been captured. In practice, this curve prediction has held up fairly accurately. Not all products or new technologies follow the same shape, but by and large, historical adoption patterns for disruptive technologies and products have followed a general shape. The shape of this can be influenced by a variety of factors, including the speed of technological advancements, cost curves, regulations, competition, or even social norms. Some may never experience them at all, as technologies often fail to make it past the innovators or early adopters stages, even if it is a superior product. An example of this is the iPhone. Smartphones came out in 2007 and their adoption grew massively. Now the adoption rate of the market is slowing down, but Apple turned into a trillion-dollar company in the process. Another example of this is solar energy. This is the International Energy Agency projection of solar PV since the year 2000. The red line is the reality and all the blue and black lines are the actual projections the IEA has been making since 2009. Every year they have been wrong. All of their projections are linear and in some cases they even show that the adoption is going to go down. In reality, solar has been growing 40 to 50% per year. In its latest update, the IEA says wind and solar growth forecasts have been revised upwards by over 25% from last year. Moreover, the new forecast for 2021 is nearly 40% higher than the one published by the IEA just a year ago, in May 2020, dashed light blue line. The IEA has repeatedly raised its expectations for wind and solar over the past decade, drawing fire from critics that say, in the words of a 2019 Reuters article, that it hasn't played the speed at which the world could switch renewable sources of energy. Last year's flagship IEA World Energy Outlook made a major update to the agency's assumptions about the costs of financing the construction of wind and solar over the next 2 decades. This gave a significant boost to the agency's expectations for the growth of renewables. The problem with these forecasts is that they take one variable and basically extrapolate it. They don't take into account that technology has never been adopted linearly, but as S-curves. So the conclusion is that mainstream analysis is about forecasting the past, not the future. Convergence is a very important factor regarding technology disruptors. Why did the smartphone happen in 2007? It didn't come out 1 year before or 1 year later. Both the iPhone and Android came out in the same year, 2007. What was special about 2007? This year was when all the technologies that made the smartphone possible converged. These technologies were touch screens, data storage, computer power and broadband. All these technologies came together to make an economically feasible smartphone possible in 2007. When we talk about smartphones, we mostly talk about Androids and iPhones. And this shows us another lesson about disruption. Before 2007, many companies were positioned to build the smartphone. Motorola was there, Nokia as well, even BlackBerry. But none of them are relevant in this space today. Why is this? Because technology disruptions happen from the outside. Business model innovations are as disruptive as technology itself. And business model innovations are also made possible by the convergence of technologies. So how does this translate to transportation? Can transportation be disrupted as quickly as cell phones? Turns out that cars took over horses at the beginning of the century from 0 to 95% in 20 years in the United States. From the tipping point to about 80% happened in 10 years. This was 100 years ago. And this happened while 2 brand new industries came to life. The car industry and the oil industry. These two industries were not built, just waiting for the disruption to happen. We were building them as we went. We were building these industries in parallel to the construction of the new road infrastructure nationwide. And at the same time fighting World War I. While all of the disruption was taking place in just about 10 years. Regarding business model innovations, the convergence of technologies, and transportation, let's talk about on-demand transportation. A perfect example of this is Uber. Uber started in 2009 in a small apartment in San Francisco. Uber is a business model innovation that was made possible by the convergence of smartphone and cloud technology. So it's no coincidence that Uber started in 2009, 2 years after the smartphone came out. 7 years after starting, Uber had more bookings than the whole taxi industry in the US. So 7 years from a little apartment to disrupting a whole industry. Because of ride-hailing technologies, people stopped buying new cars a few years ago. Let's take China for example. Even before the coronavirus shut down countless factories and forced millions to shelter in their homes to avoid infection, consumer demand for new passenger cars in China had been on the wane. After years of non-stop growth, car sales were down in 2018, the first dip in the world's largest market for passenger cars since the 1990s, and then down again in 2019. But China's decline in car sales goes much deeper than the coronavirus or even the slowing economy and trade tensions with the United States. China is likely to see below expectation sales of new passenger vehicles for several more years at least, a consequence of several structural changes in the market. The once accepted vision for 2025 of hitting 28 million cars sold annually may have to wait until the end of the decade to be realized. The weakness in sales has come as a shock to the global market, which until recently expected to see nothing but rapid growth in China's car buying future. One pivotal element in weaker car sales has been the explosion of ride-hailing services, which have claimed more than 330 million users annually. Far more interconnected than most Western offerings, China's ride-hailing market now is organized around a couple of major shared apps that allow potential riders to choose among various ride-hailing services. The auto market in India was also down, as well as Europe and the US. The trend is clear: people are not buying new cars. Essentially no gasoline cars. Another concept to consider here is market trauma. Mainstream analysts say that EVs are only 2 to 3% of the market. How much damage can it do? They say it's going to take 10 to 20 years before this takes over. But a technology can disrupt the economics of an incumbent way before they have 10 to 20% of the market. Small changes can have swift, dramatic impact in existing industries. One example is the Tesla battery bank in Australia. The Tesla battery holds only 2% of the ancillary services market capacity, and yet has taken 55% market share. It has pushed down wholesale prices by 90%. Incumbent revenues have been brought down by 90%. Natural gas peaker plants are being stranded. What are the key technologies that once they converge they are going to disrupt pretty much everything over the next 10 to 15 years? There are 5 technologies. Batteries, electric vehicles, autonomous technology, on-demand transportation, solar energy. These 5 technologies are going to disrupt the energy and transportation industry. So let's start with batteries. Lithium-ion batteries are the most common type of way to store excess energy. Lithium-ion batteries are used in everything, ranging from your mobile phone and laptop to electric vehicles and grid storage. The price of lithium-ion battery cells declined by 97% in the last 3 decades. A battery with a capacity of 1 kilowatt-hour that cost $7,500 in 1991, was just $181 in 2018. That's 41 times less. What's promising is that prices are still falling steeply. The cost halved between 2014 and 2018. A halving in only 4 years. Let's put this price decline in perspective. The popular Nissan Leaf electric car, which is also one of the most affordable models, has a 40 kilowatt-hour battery. At our 2018 price, the battery costs around $7,300. Imagine trying to buy the same model in 1991, the battery alone would cost $300,000. Or take the Tesla Model S, 75D, which has a 75 kilowatt-hour battery. In 2018 the battery costs around $13,600, in 1991 it would have been $564,000. More than $500,000 for a car battery. This shows how important these price reductions are for decarbonizing not only our electricity grids but our transport systems too. In 1991 the market size of lithium-ion cells was tiny, there was just 0.13 megawatts installed. That's just 130 kilowatt-hours. Less than 275 kilowatt-hours battery packs that you'd find in a Tesla car. Since then deployed capacity has increased rapidly. By 2016, this had grown to 78,000 megawatt-hour. That's 6 orders of magnitude higher. The relationship between price and cumulative installed capacity is called the learning curve. This is a concept that is often used to understand cost improvements in scaling technologies. The learning rate tells us, on average, how much the price of something falls for every doubling of cumulative capacity. We find that for lithium-ion cells, this learning rate was 20.1%. This means prices fell an average of 18.9% every time the installed capacity doubled. As it happens, This is similar to the learning rate of solar modules. With every doubling of installed solar capacity, the price of solar modules dropped by an average of 20.2%. The improvements we've seen in battery technologies are not limited to lower costs. Energy density measures the amount of electrical energy you can store in a liter, or unit, of battery. In 1991 you could only get 200 watt-hours of capacity per liter of battery. You can now get over 700 watt-hours. That's a 3.4-fold increase. What this means is that batteries have been getting smaller and lighter for any given electrical capacity. This is a crucial technological improvement, as one of the major drawbacks of some battery technologies is that they are heavy, and this limits their use in a number of technologies that are still fossil fuel powered. Our batteries are now only a fraction of the cost and are smaller and lighter. These technological improvements are just as essential to making low-carbon electricity the default affordable option as reductions in the cost of solar panels or wind turbines. So batteries enable the electric vehicle. Let's now say why electric vehicles are disruptive. First of all, electric vehicles are 10 times cheaper to charge than internal combustion vehicles on a per-mile basis. Electric cars can represent huge savings, especially when they are driven for business use. This is because the cost of charging electric vehicles is much lower than the price of fuel, which means that the cost per mile of electric vehicles is significantly less than that of internal combustion engine vehicles. They're also much lower than hybrids, which have limited range, or regularly travel above their all-electric range on a daily basis. Typically, conventional fleets can cut their fuel costs by around 80% by switching to battery electric vehicles. Regarding maintenance, internal combustion engine cars or hybrid cars have more than 2,000 moving parts in the engine. On the other hand, electric vehicles have about 20 moving parts. Compared to internal combustion engines, electric vehicles have fewer moving parts, so compared to gasoline, diesel and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, their maintenance costs are lower, which can result in significant cost savings. Electric vehicles also have the advantage that you can have any number of motors, which is something you can't do with a conventional engine. This essentially gives you a lot more control over traction. You can even park your car sideways with an electric vehicle. One of the most important aspects about electric vehicles is that they can last much more than gasoline cars. Electric vehicles can last more than 500,000 miles, when gasoline cars can last less than 200,000 miles. Tesla even announced recently that a 1 million mile electric vehicle will be released soon. So if we drive 10,000 miles per year and electric vehicles last 500,000 miles per year, we would need 50 years to break one down. So, for individuals this might not be that interesting, but when we talk about fleets, such as Uber or FedEx, this is a game changer. This is really significant since fleets ride their cars for more than 100,000 miles per year. So you can ride an electric vehicle for 5 years, or change a gasoline car every 2 years. For purely economic reasons, electric vehicles make more sense for fleets than conventional internal combustion engines. Regarding the cost of the vehicle, the falling cost of producing batteries for electric vehicles, combined with dedicated production lines in carmakers plants, will make them cheaper to buy, on average before 2025. Electric vehicles reaching price parity with the internal combustion engine is seen as a key milestone in the world's transition from burning fossil fuels. New battery prices are expected to fall by 58% between 2020 and 2030 to $58 per kilowatt-hour. A reduction in battery costs to below $100 per kilowatt-hour is viewed as an important step towards greater take-up of fully electric vehicles. Once we reach this point, there will be no turning back. We will shift abruptly since electric vehicles are far better, they are more powerful, they last longer, they fuel up for a fraction of the cost, no maintenance, and you will be able to acquire them for less than the International's combustion counterparts. The switch is going to happen for purely economic reasons. There will be no reason to buy a gasoline car. And we are already seeing this. In October, Amazon showed off the first of its planned custom electric delivery vehicles, with plans to have 10,000 on the road by 2022, and 100,000 by 2030. The company first announced in February 2020 that it ordered the custom delivery vehicles from electric vehicle maker Rivian. The electric vehicles will help Amazon reach its goal of being carbon neutral by 2040 for the climate pledge, and help Amazon continue to grow its logistics business. The interesting part about this is that Amazon is not doing this to be green, they are doing this for economic reasons. They do this because it is the right economic choice for them, because they are cutting the cost of deliveries. If Amazon is doing this, what do you think their competition will do? They will have to go electric, otherwise they will not be able to compete. Another interesting thing you can do with your electric vehicle is power your home for a few days. Ford recently announced the electric version of the F-150. Believe it or not, this battery-powered truck can really power your house when the lights go out, and better still, doing so won't require a rat's nest of extension cords or even a portable generator. What Ford calls intelligent backup power enables this all-electric rig to feed power from its enormous battery pack through its hardwired wall charger directly into your home's electrical system. The F-150 Lightning can provide up to 9.6 kilowatts of power output. According to Ford, that's more than enough to fully power a house at any one time, and considering the size of the battery, it could do that for at least 3 days, based on a daily average of 30 kilowatt-hours. The automaker says you can make that power last for up to 10 days if you ration the electricity accordingly. Now let's talk about autonomous technology. There are currently more than 40 companies investing tens of billions of dollars in autonomous technology. They are racing to be the first in autonomy. Why is that? Because autonomous technology is like an operating system. If you think of it, electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles are computers on wheels. They are a computer with a big battery and wheels. Autonomous technology is the operating system. If you think about the history of computing, there are usually two companies that dominate the market. Think of iOS and Android. About Mac and Windows. And this is exactly what will happen with autonomous technology. The first two that figure it out will be the ones that dominate it. And the other companies will have to pay money to these two companies if they want to play. This is why so many companies are investing so much in this technology. They want to be first. For example, Google's sibling company Waymo announced Wednesday a $2.5 billion investment round, which will go toward advancing its autonomous driving technology and growing its team. The company has already deployed its autonomous vehicles in Phoenix as a ride-hailing service. The company's delivery unit, Waymo Via, is also working with freight partners and delivery clients such as UPS to transport goods. Waymo announced in March 2020 it raised $2.25 billion in its first external funding round last year. By July 2020, it said it raised a total of $3.2 billion after an extension of that round. Prior to that, Alphabet supported the business itself, as it does the rest of its other bets, but the funding move showed Waymo sought even more capital. Waymo says it eventually wants individuals to own and operate vehicles using its autonomous driving technology. The company said it's driven tens of millions of miles on public roads across 25 cities in the US so far. So here is the main question about autonomous vehicles: are they safe? More than 35,000 people die every year in motor vehicle crashes in the US alone. Since self-driving vehicles can theoretically react faster than human drivers and don't drive drunk, text while driving, or get tired, they should be able to dramatically improve vehicle safety. They also promise to increase the independence and mobility of seniors and others who cannot easily drive. More than $250 billion has been invested in self-driving vehicles over the last 3 years. The Society of Automotive Engineers has defined 6 levels of driving automation. Levels 3 to 5 are considered automated driving systems, ADSs, in which the driver does not need to pay attention to the road. At level 3, the driver can read a book or watch a movie but must be able to take over control within 10 to 60 seconds if asked to do so by the vehicle. One big issue for level 3 vehicles is that a crash might occur in the 10 seconds the driver spends taking over, so level 3 vehicles will probably need to include an odd where 10 seconds is reasonably safe, for example. Low-speed highway traffic jams. The difference between levels 4 and 5 is that level 4 vehicles are restricted to an operational design domain, ODD, which usually includes restricted geography, for example, a limited set of streets in a city, and may include other restrictions based on weather, time of day, precipitation, road grades and curvature, and other factors. Level 5 vehicles can drive anywhere with no restrictions and are theoretically effective replacements for consumer vehicles and commercial trucks. Many of the consumer vehicles on the road today, such as Teslas, have driver assistance capabilities. They can keep the vehicle centered in its lane, and they can accelerate and brake automatically. However, it is not safe for the driver to read a book or watch a movie. The driver must constantly monitor the road, and be ready to take over control instantly. These are level 2 vehicles and are not considered ADSs. Drivers must pay attention to the road and be ready to take over instantly. Automated driving systems, ADSs, are being designed to drive a car, taxi, bus, or other vehicle while the driver is otherwise engaged, for example, reading a book. Level 3 and Level 4 ADSs have restrictions on their operational design domains, ODDs, which may include restricted geography and restrictions based on weather, time of day, precipitation, road grades and curvature, and other factors. Level 5 vehicles can operate anywhere and do not have an ODD. There are good reasons to assume that ADSs will be safer than human drivers. They never get tired, text while driving, or drive after drinking. According to Tesla, driving with Tesla's autopilot engaged is nearly 10 times safer than average cars, and carries almost 90% lower risk of being involved in a car accident. The data shows that when driving without autopilot, Tesla's active safety features are responsible for reducing accident risk 5-fold compared to the national average. Driving without either, accidents in Tesla cars occur about half as often as the national average. The NHTSA Special Crash Investigations Viewer and Crash Investigation Sampling System, which include crash dates from 2016 to 2019, show that out of around 8,000 open cases, none of them involve Tesla vehicles. The Tesla Model 3 has also been awarded a Top Safety Pick Plus award from the US-based Highway Safety Insurance Organization EASE, Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, for the last 3 years. Every full year it has been in production, in the mid-size luxury car segment. Autonomous vehicles are not just for cars. Anything that moves on wheels is going to be autonomous. So, autonomous is disruptive. Electric vehicles are disruptive. On-demand transportation is disruptive. But the real disruption is in the convergence of these three technologies. This convergence allows a new business model to flourish. Transport that is on demand, autonomous, and electric. This is known as transport as a service. Transportation as a service refers to the buying of miles, trips, and/or experiences and none of the hassle of ownership, the buying and financing of vehicles, maintenance, gas, insurance, traffic, actual driving, and sometimes even finding and paying for storage. Using transportation as a service means not having to put up with any of the headaches of current vehicle ownership, while still having access to the necessary transportation. Transportation as a service is the future. Why? Cars are expensive. Just about every type of vehicle costs on average $9,000 a year to maintain, all in. Cars sit parked most of the time. Whether in your driveway or a parking lot, the fact is cars are not being driven 95% of the time. Cars are a major source of global warming. Vehicles with combustion engines contribute 1/5 of the air pollution in the United States due to the carbon dioxide they emit. The convergence of electric vehicles, EVs, with autonomous technology, autonomous vehicles, and ride-hailing will create an entirely new form of transportation, transport as a service, or robo-taxis, which has the potential to transform our road transportation system. It will lead to the end of car ownership, as people access cars when needed, with no upfront costs, and pay a charge per mile, or a subscription, vastly lower than the cost of driving their own vehicle. These cars will be fleet-owned and will be in use far more than vehicles currently traveling 10x the distance of an individually owned car each year, 100,000 miles instead of 10,000 miles. The transition will happen far faster than expected, driven mainly by economics. The key to understanding the cost improvements of transportation as a service vehicles is understanding vehicle degradation, which affects both maintenance costs and vehicle lifetime, in miles. The main causes of vehicle degradation are all vastly reduced in an autonomous electric vehicle, AEV, due to reduced friction, 20 moving parts in an EV compared to 2,000 moving parts in a gasoline vehicle leads to far less friction and means there is less that can go wrong. EVs are essentially batteries on wheels. Reduced heat and vibration, the simplicity of the powertrain dramatically reduces heat and vibration in AEVs, which reduces wear and tear on the vehicles. Reduced time-based degradation, under the transportation as a service model, cars no longer sit idle for 96% of the time, as they do in private ownership, but are instead in operation 10 times more, covering 100,000 miles per year instead of 10,000. This reduces degradation like corrosion or partial battery degradation, driven by car lifetime in years. Vehicles will last much longer in terms of vehicle miles and cost just a fraction to repair, conservatively estimated at 20% of gasoline vehicle repair costs. Only transportation as a service will benefit from the increased lifetimes. In individual ownership, a 1 million mile EV would last 100 years. Given the increasing pace of fleet turnover, vehicles will be obsolete quickly in the individual ownership model, and so depreciation, or lease, payments will still be based on residual value calculations. But in transportation as a service, the capacity to travel 1 million miles combined with fleet ownership, no secondary market, and high utilization means that depreciation will be calculated by spreading the costs over the lifetime miles evenly, leading to dramatic savings. Each mile traveled by transportation as a service will cost just 1/1000th each of the upfront cost. The upfront cost of an EV compared to a gasoline vehicle is the key focus of commentators, but it has far less impact on cost per mile than the improvement in lifetime miles. Insurance costs. 90% reduction as AI will be dramatically safer than human drivers and cars will be impossible to steal. Fuel costs. 70% reduction as electricity cheaper than gasoline per unit of energy, and EV motors are far more efficient than combustion engines. Finance costs. 90% cheaper per mile as the fixed annual interest cost is spread over 10 times as many miles. Vehicle manufacturers will compete on cost per mile, rather than upfront cost of purchase or other attributes like performance, comfort, appearance, etc. Currently, manufacturers make money from selling vehicles and maintaining them, creating incentives towards planned obsolescence. In the future, they will compete to maximize vehicle lifetimes and minimize operating costs. Further gains are possible as vehicles are redesigned to strip out unnecessary accessories and platforms are created that can be easily maintained, with all parts capable of simple replacement when required. Labor in maintenance will be minimized through automation. Altogether, these changes will deliver transport by transportation as a service or transportation as a service pool at a cost per mile that is 4 to 10 times cheaper than purchasing a new car and 2 to 4 times cheaper than operating, maintenance, fuel, and insurance, an existing vehicle. The result of these disruptions will be a much faster transition than is currently perceived by mainstream analysis, which focuses not on the disruption of car ownership, but only on the technology disruption of individually owned EVs replacing one-for-one ICE vehicles when they are purchased new, which leads to a multi-decadal replacement of the existing vehicle fleet. Existing owners will abandon their vehicles, stranding up to 100 million gasoline and electric vehicles in the United States. This decrease in cost opens the way to free transportation, initially in the transportation as a service pool model, where the low cost of transport, 1 to 2 cents per mile, is covered by other revenue sources, from advertising, data monetization, entertainment, or product sales. Other revenue could come from grid stabilization and demand management, corporate sponsorship of fleets or government subsidies to provide access to transport. Indeed, the success of the winners might be defined by their ability to exploit these new opportunities more than their ability to produce vehicles. All things being equal, one would expect that the scale of this cost reduction would lead to far faster adoption than is currently expected. However, all else is not equal. Once adoption of transportation as a service begins, systems dynamics will drive it ever faster. Given this new economic analysis, how quickly will the disruption occur? To understand this, we need to consider the drivers of decisions and actions by consumers, demand, businesses, supply, and policy makers, the regulatory environment. We also need to understand the nonlinear impact of the accelerators and brakes that occur in technology disruptions. These are the feedback loops that make transportation as a service ever cheaper and better to use over time, and individually owned ICE vehicles more expensive and harder to use. These are the network effects, tipping points, and market forces that change dynamically over time. Consumers will be motivated by cost savings above all else, which amount to 10% of total household income, a minimum of $5,600 per year. The scale of the savings will override other factors like love of driving or ownership. The value of additional free time to work or do other things will support this. Pent-up demand for transportation as a service from those excluded from transport, the elderly, disabled, or poor, the replacement of current taxis and ride-hailing networks, and early adopters will ensure transportation as a service demand gets a fast start. Businesses will be motivated to seize market share by flooding local markets with vehicles, given the winners-take-all dynamic of the network effect for transportation as a service fleets. The more vehicles, the better the availability, the more customers, the size of the potential market, and the existential risk to their existing business. This will ensure vehicle supply meets demand. Businesses will face a competitive market environment where price trends towards cost, meaning consumers benefit as cost savings are passed on in lower prices. Policymakers will adopt a supportive approach to regulation, driven by the economic gains, $1 trillion in consumer disposable income and $1 trillion in increased GDP from time freed from driving, lower infrastructure spending, from reduction in vehicle numbers as one vehicle does the work of 10 plus, and a land bonanza as valuable urban land freed from roads and parking requirements becomes available. Health benefits from cleaner air and fewer accidents, and environmental gains from vastly lower GHG emissions, will spur this supportive environment. The countries and regions that lead will benefit from gains in jobs, revenues, and influence that come with technology leadership, driving a competitive regulatory framework in which regions compete to lead the disruption. Incumbent pushback from oil companies or other losers will be offset by support from the vastly richer Silicon Valley. Some countries might resist, but developments elsewhere will mean they are forced to play catch-up. Transportation as a service will get a fast start in cities and then radiate outwards to suburban and rural areas. As adoption increases, a tipping point in availability will be reached early, when it becomes feasible for car owners to rely entirely on transportation as a service. As used car supplies increase and demand decreases, values will plummet. Those steadfastly sticking to individual ownership will be far more likely to buy used cars, driving down new car purchases dramatically and leading to a death spiral of reversing economies of scale, increasing costs and leading to supply chain breakdown. Over time, another tipping point is reached when gas stations begin to close down, spare parts disappear, and maintenance becomes harder or costlier to find. ICE vehicles will become harder and more expensive to use. Consumer opinion moves from being a brake, scared of autonomous vehicles, to being an accelerator, seeing human drivers as reckless, dangerous, and slow, driving regulation that bans or restricts human-driven vehicles. Barriers perceived to slow adoption of EVs, like range or charging availability, are not relevant to transportation as a service trips, where cars will have sufficient charge for trips ordered, and car relays, battery swapping, and fast charging will enable longer trips. We see no supply, demand, or policy constraints, meaning that within 10 years of regulatory approval of transportation as a service, the vast majority of passenger miles traveled, 95%, in the US will be with transportation as a service. Even in the rural areas, where wait times and cost, due to redundant trips, might be higher, lower incomes will motivate adoption, as will the increasing cost and difficulty of using a gasoline vehicle. The only holdouts might be the very rich, the most rural, or the equivalent of those who still use horses for transport. The key enabler of transportation as a service is autonomous technology. Its availability is based on both technological progress and regulation. Given our analysis of both, we have high confidence that it will begin in 2020-25, with 2021 as the most likely date. Even if the US adopts a precautionary approach, other areas, China, Singapore, European cities will push ahead, meaning the technology reaches readiness in this time frame. Autonomous vehicles learn by doing, so the more cars on the road and the more miles they cover, the faster they will be ready. Technologies that allow cars to benefit from the learning expected from 100 million miles in just 1,000 miles are in development, offering a faster track to deployment. This means that by 2030, the disruption will be almost complete. Regulation can drive this process even faster by hastening the development of AV technology through broad trials, removing barriers and accelerating adoption by ensuring universal access. The utility model, special lanes or routes for autonomous vehicles to allow faster travel, and greater volume of traffic, or through restrictions on humans drivers in cities or during peak times.